White ball!
Good block to deny the shot from Owen Duffy.
A lot has been said surrounding the issue of the GAA going from its traditional amateur ethos to full-blown professional. There are few athletes in Ireland who train to and maintain professional standards already than Tyrone's Mattie Donnelly. This week I caught up with the double all-star from Trillick and got his thoughts on the professional direction the GAA is going.
Mattie, what changes have you noticed yourself since you started playing with regards effort required to compete with the top teams?
I suppose from when I started out now, initially I was in the county squad back in 2010, so from then it had started to change slightly from watching from outside. You'd seen how fit the Dublin teams that were coming on the scene then, how fit they were getting, and probably that was a breakthrough year in terms of commitment levels, and that before that the gym work wouldn't have been compulsory, it wouldn't have been standard practice. You would have had the few boys doing it, whereas Dublin and Cork teams kind of lifted the physicality required to play county level to another level, and you had teams saying we needed to do this, we need to do that in the gym, and that was kind of the buzzword back then, getting in the gym. So immediately that added probably an extra night or two till you're training the 2 nights in the pitches and that. So even back then, coming as a student at the time, you seen the level required to get this, so you needed to put that extra work in. It actually resulted in me taking a year out, even 2 years out, in 2010 and 11, to get the level where I thought I needed to be at to compete at county level. So the physical demands were great. So for players coming in at that age and even at the older age, near the 30s and that, they needed to be doing extra work to keep up with the posse, which was the likes of Dublin and that at the time. So then that automatically added 2 or 3 nights till your nights on the pitch. So before you knew it, you had 5 nights where you were out training or needed to be doing something, and it wasn't as it was before, where some players made the choice themselves. It was probably compulsory and was put to you that you needed to put this time in if you wanted to compete. So there was a big shift in them years where it went from maybe you played football, gym wasn't that standard, till where you have today, where it's literally, if you're not doing it, you're left behind. And you have, at least you're weary of doing something every single day now. You mightn't be training every day, but you might have rest days where you're doing nothing, but you're doing that to improve your performance. So you're weary and you're making a commitment every day probably to compete.
And you're speaking of the gym there, like Jim McGuinness actually himself basically took the whole, I suppose, fitness side of it to that hyper fitness model in 2012 when Donegal finally broke through. But he himself has been quoted as saying that he reckons the GAA shouldn't really turn professional because he doesn't see it as sustainable in the long run over maybe 10 or 20 years. What's your thoughts on that?
Certainly, you look at other sports that have turned professional, even the likes of rugby, were at a similar crossroads back in the early 90s, I think it was, and they made that step into professional sport. But you think rugby and other sports in professional arena, they're all global sports, whereas Gaelic it's our national sport in Ireland, and it probably doesn't have that global draw. I know there's been great efforts by the GAA around the world, and it does spread far and wide, but it really does go back to the Irish population really, that the majority is playing it. So whether it would be sustainable or not, I'm not sure, but certainly in terms of fitness levels and commitment levels, it definitely is a lot of comparisons and crossovers to the lifestyle of a professional athlete. And obviously it's not professional, so it is an amateur sport, so you have men working full-time jobs and that too, so whether that's physically and mentally sustainable for players as well to stay amateur is another question that needs to be answered. But again, I don't think it is sustainable. I can't see Gaelic going professional, but again, there's a lot of questions either for and against.
So, I mean, you spoke there about the physical demands that are on inter-county players these days and how that's sort of progressed over the years. Do you think, is there such a thing as too much, and maybe is it possibly a danger to their health long term?
So I've had this conversation a lot, even, you know, I'm thinking, I've heard Kieran McGeeney talking about it before, you know, the demands on us isn't dissimilar to a lot of other sports in Ireland, amateur sports. I think in the likes of swimmers in Ireland, you know, they train twice a day, probably 5 days a week, and when you actually add up all the hours that Gaelic players put in, ultimately it wouldn't be as highly ranked as you would think to other sports in Ireland. So again, it depends what way you look at it. I would always see that the hours and commitment that I'd be putting in is probably a privilege, that you only have a short time to be fit to put that in, and there'll be a day when you're not fit, and that's the way I approach it. Whereas others mightn't think they're getting as much rewarded with, or there mightn't be as much incentive, and it can be a chore. So it depends, probably perspective, but I do think it can be healthy if you view it the right way, and that you're lucky to be putting that. And at the end of the day, when you're out exercising anyway, it's good for your health. So
Yeah.
it depends, whatever way. It's all about perspective, and then when you measure it against other sports who are putting in unbelievable commitment as well, it mightn't be as much as we make it out to be, but certainly there is some people that fall out of love with it, or maybe it does get too much of them, and that's where you need that probably support network, where if they are getting it tough, or even it does affect their mental health, that there is a support network there, which there is. So again, depends what way you look at it.
Do you think the GAA themselves are a wee bit reluctant to introduce any kind of payment schemes for players, as it goes against that traditional sort of amateur ethos of the organisation, and could that be down to stubbornness?
Certainly is. It's probably in the nature. It's just in the nature of people in general. They are afraid of change. Making that step towards professionalism will be a massive change, and obviously Gaelic Games is just it's embodied in our nature in Ireland, and that will be a massive change and massive shift in probably our mindset towards it and our approach to it. So there definitely is a lot of fear, even from a player's point of view. What would it look like when it's professional? And I know that a lot of players will be reluctant for it to go professional. A lot of volunteers, a lot of people will be, but again, it goes back to the commitment levels and the time you're putting in, and it's probably crossed the line in terms of being professional. So I think maybe they might have to look at meeting in the middle, but I'm not sure it's the road that you want to go down in being professional.
Yeah. Well, last year alone there was a sort of a high profile €6.2 million deal between the GAA and the GPA, which was to finance player mileage and nutritional expenses. Do you think maybe is that sort of paving the way for outright wages down the line?
I'm not sure what their agenda is down the line, but I know, as I said there, I mentioned, you know, it's important that there's a balance between the commitment we're putting in and then what we're sacrificing there, without going full out professional. And I think that is probably meeting somewhere in the middle, whereas they've recognised that we are putting in a lot and contributing a lot to communities and the country in general. They've recognised it there, and they are rewarding us and making sure that there is some sort of balance there, and that we're not being flogged too much. All out wages, I'm not sure what. I would need more insight to what their plans are, but certainly the direction it's going, if you look back from when the GPA was formed, even the players' body and the direction that the funding and that's going. Certainly, if you were to say it was to continue in that trajectory for the next few years, you probably would be going there. But again, is that sustainable is another question.
Agus Ed McCory tachan hín an son on lína lá chomh an son agus fuair sé cúpla points on the night.
So let's talk about Dublin for a second. They themselves have had a deal with a Japanese car manufacturer, and that sees all their senior footballers, hurlers and management get a free car basically for representing the county at that level. What's your thoughts on that, and do you think is it a positive or a negative incentive?
Again, it's nothing I've given too much thought to, but I know that it can go one or two ways. I suppose if you're a Dublin player and you see that incentive there, like no one's going to turn down a free car at the end of the day. And if you see that incentive there for it's basically a reward for the results they've been getting, in fairness, it can make you work harder. It can make you maybe fall into a false sense of security, you know. So it can go two ways there, but certainly they would, if they were looking at it and seeing what got them that rewards and that incentive being there, then it would be a positive impact, and it would be an incentive to make you work harder and probably make that commitment when they are being looked after like that. But certainly that's a nice incentive. Like no one's gonna complain about that. Like.
Well, without diving too deep into it, Dublin was sort of, you know, the general consensus is that they get favouritism and things like that, and you know, not only with them playing most of their home games in Croke Park and championship venues and stuff like that, but with regards to the rest of the teams in Leinster or even Ireland, how are they supposed to compete with a county that's basically getting so many more resources and, you know, financial incentives like cars?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt the playing field might be shifted in favour of them in terms of them incentives and the financial resources, but that's understandable too. The capital city of Ireland, the most successful team in Ireland. Again, a lot of the team that's come through and is dominant, and I've said this many times, they probably didn't come through that structure and where that finance was to the fore. They weren't that successful at underage level. They probably came across, when they started out, I don't think you could actually say they were a direct result of the money and the funding that was going to Dublin. I think they earned and paved their own way as a team. But certainly the next generation, it will be interesting to see how they stand up on the back of all the coaching and the resources that went into Dublin. It will be interesting to see if they maintain it, because obviously before this team came along, the Bernard Brogans, Kieran Sullivan's and that, Dublin had went a while without winning. So I don't think that this team at the minute is a direct result of all them resources. Obviously it helps them now that they're getting all that funding and resources, and it helps them maintain their level of performance. But I do think like Dublin has a rich history of producing really good teams. I think that was the next team in line, and they paved their own way by just wanting to be successful with Dublin. But it'll be interesting to see this new wave of players coming in. I mean, you already see them filtering in, kind of like John Small, Jack McCaffrey, and even further down the line of an under-21 team in Iron final now. So it will be interesting to see that new wave coming in the back and see if that's maintained for a long period of time. And I think that's when you might have to get worried about other teams competing. But again, every county I think can put in the time and put 15 players on the pitch to compete. You know, so I don't think you shouldn't be falling into the trap of probably leaning on such a team's getting this amount of money. That's why they're beating us. You know, so. I think that's the biggest danger I think for other teams, is that they do fall into that trap. But there's no doubt it does help. It does help, but it would make it all the better, more of a challenge for other teams to try and compete as well, I suppose.
Well, bearing in mind the change in the landscape over the past 10 or 15 years, where do you see the whole thing being in the next 10 or 15 years?
That's a good question. I do see it being a lot more challenging for players. Certainly the lifespan of a county player is going to reduce big time. I've had this conversation with a few people actually, because right down to 14, even younger, they're getting educated in proper physical preparation, they're getting educated how to move right, and really they're getting the foundations in place for a long career. And when they hit 20, now they're going to be physically ready and they're going to be moving probably faster, they're going to be stronger than people that went before, and it's going to be harder to maintain that. So that next generation you're going to see over the next 10 years are going to be physically elite, even to what it's at now. You're talking another level probably up from that. So physically I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see how the game develops in the next 10 years. Obviously that's going to require a lot of time, which goes in with the professional argument. Again, I think Gaelic has a tendency to go full circle too. I think obviously you had the era of the blanket defence and that. I think now teams are going edging back towards attacking football as well, and the balance there, and really focusing on skills. So I think in terms of the game itself, skill wise and physical wise, I think it's going to be at a very high level. Obviously that's going to require a lot of time, so it will be interesting, you know, where the cut-off point is to the time being put in, the time being allowed to put in, and how that fits in with your amateur lifestyle, if it is amateur in 10 years.
Well, finally, Mattie, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If the decision was put out in front of you, professional or amateur, what way would you swing?
I would definitely stick with amateur. I just think professional sport would dilute everything that's good about Gaelic, and I've thought long and hard about it. I watch a lot of professional sports, and they see it as a job really, and that's basically what it is. It is a job. Whereas, as long as you have people that are just playing it for the right reasons, and you volunteers playing it for the right reasons, you'll always have that association with it. And I think that's priceless really, the association people can get from Gaelic and it being amateur. I think that's the most important thing that you need to hold on to, and once you take that away, you take away a lot of what's good about Gaelic and what it does for the people of Ireland. So I would definitely be in favour of amateur. I think you should be playing for the right reasons there, and you'll have people, as long as it's amateur, you'll have people that are playing for the right reason. Whereas if you bring in the incentive of money, you'll have a lot of people maybe just saying, right, I'll focus on Gaelic now, there's a living to be earned here. So amateur all the way for me.
Right, that's brilliant, Mattie. Listen, thanks for your time today. Appreciate the talking to you.
Noon see reached. Go to McNab, the mechanics McNab, last mocha reached. Muyo Hennig at a clear Vashir to Tours to Tussa Gasu, the Shin on a feint good Johnson, British Dachanson, the Donnelly a bit.
Mattie Donnelly.
Ta